Violent waves crashed against the hull of my cabin as I looked over various hotties off of my Instagram from all over the world, most of them being ones I'd already slept with. I had been at sea 2 weeks already, which meant we were almost at our final destination, a tiny remote island outside the limits of civilization, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, an island called Herd Island. In fact, only a few vessels had even touched its shores throughout all of human history. It is thousands of miles from any continental landmass, and you must sail through some of the most treacherous seas on Earth to get to it. The reason I was heading to this island was I was involved with a group of successful young entrepreneurs, known as the Ocean Adventurers Society. One thing that we tended to do in this group was share, over a group chat, various dares and ridiculous ways that we would spend our fortunes on general absurdity. The mission I was on now, though, certainly took the cake for most irresponsibly absurd displays of wealth and free time that had ever been posted in the group before. I had chartered a yacht off the coast of Australia to make the 2-week journey out to Big Ben, which was the highest mountain on the island, and the mission was to go up to the top and take a dump on top of it. I know it sounds juvenile, but with this group, absurdity reigns king, and I was among the best at it. I would have to keep this mission of mine a secret, though, considering my girlfriend was on board, and she was under the impression that this was just a romantic journey for the two of us. In fact, only one member of the crew actually knew what was going on. His name was Sadiq. He was an African man I met in one of the campsites we toured through a year before when I was sightseeing in Uganda. He was the bartender at this outdoor bar on a cliffside that overlooked the Nile River. He didn't speak much, but we really hit it off somehow when I slept out on a hammock out at his bar one night, and I talked to him until the sun came up. To be honest, I don't really remember much of what happened, but all I know is the next morning he had a signed contract for me stating that he was now my official paid drinking buddy, and that he was going to be tagging along with me on all of my adventures. Thinking this was pretty hilarious, I figured why not. At that moment, I got a text from Sadiq. It was a picture of his enormous black balls in the palm of his hand. Made me regret getting that son of a bitch on my satellite phone plan. Unable to relax after that, I walked up to the top deck to see what was going on with the rest of the crew. Victoria, my supermodel girlfriend, was up there sunbathing without a top on, and Rich, our trusty captain, was looking into a set of binoculars. He was clearly trying to pretend he didn't notice her breasts were out. He had been sort of annoyed about the mission from day one, but I got the impression he really needed the money, so he took the job anyways. "I can see it in the distance, sir," Rich announced hesitantly. "Sounds like time for champagne, then." "Victoria, let's pop them bottles!" I exclaimed. Rich shook his head and aimed the bow toward the island. I saw above us a flock of crows flying in a circular formation, as if something had died in the ocean below. It seemed a bit suspicious, but I had champagne bottles to pop. When we arrived at the island, we had to get into one of those little inflatable boats, so we didn't beach the yacht. So I told Victoria I'd be back later and piled into one of the little boats with Sadiq, and we set off for land. Sadiq loaded up a 9mm handgun and put it in the back of his shorts just in case. When we got to the beach, though, we discovered something off-putting. There was an anchored down little boat gently bobbing with the tide. This made no sense because there wouldn't have been any way for its owner to return to their ship without it. I radioed Rich and asked him where it could have come from, but he just seemed kind of annoyed and told me it was probably left by another entitled rich white person. I thought that was a fair enough assessment. As the hike began, I started to feel as though this island was less explored than even we had once thought. Sadiq had this manual that he got from the Australian government about what sort of wildlife might be out there, but there were already several that we weren't seeing in the manual. When we were heading toward the center of the island, I began to hear a strange sort of screeching echoing from above us. It was in fast succession and almost felt repetitive, like an archaic form of communication. I looked above and saw a group of birds scatter. I began to notice the gray, dreary quality of the island as the wind started to pick up ahead of us. Then, to our horror, we saw the ground behind us begin to start moving. It was a horde of hundreds of snakes, slithering towards us. "Nyoka!" screamed Sadiq. He pulled out his gun and started firing. The snakes seemed to be completely unaffected by this. My stomach was in my chest as we started up the mountain as fast as we could. The snakes were gaining on us, though, and we pulled ourselves up into a hole in a cave and squeezed our way inside. We crawled until we were finally able to find an area we could stand up in. As we went deeper, we began to see evidence of humans living in the cave. There were torches mounted on the walls and a man-made stairway. Then, we heard a shuffling coming down from deep inside the cave. We slowly crept down further, and we saw a dark pool of water flowing into a deeper part of the cave. "We was almost snake food, man," Sadiq declared as he stepped up to the pool and dipped his hands in. He splashed some water up onto his face. "Yeah, hopefully we can find an exit to another part of the island, and we can avoid those snakes on the way back down." Then Sadiq's face became twisted in horror as he backed away from the pool. He started frantically wiping his hands on his pants and smacking water out from his hair. "What is it?" I stepped toward the pool and noticed there were a couple of ripped up dead birds stuck in a shallow part of it, the water flowing slowly past them. "I wasn't expecting company," a shrill voice uttered from the shadows. A tall man crept out from the corner and began to hobble towards us. He was dressed like he had been part of a research party, except his clothes were all torn and dirty, and his body was emaciated. His skin was sagging off his bones like an old bag of clothes. Yet the weirdest thing about him was his hands. They were hardened with calluses, and his fingers were freakishly long. "Who are you?" I asked as we stepped away from the strange man. "People call me the Savant. I was a scientist on a research mission several years ago when I found something of true importance on the island." He said this confidently as he wiped sweat from his circular spectacles. "And what was that?" I said as I looked at Sadiq in disbelief. The man leaned over and picked up another dead bird beside him on the ground. "These creatures, or birds as we like to call them, well, let's just say they were not always your friendly flying companions that live among you in society. They were created as a tool used to kill, in fact." I looked over at Sadiq and back to the man, suspicious to say the least. "What are you talking about, man?" "It's a brain, this place. The hub of a long-lost civilization millions of years before what we know to be man ever existed. Many of the birds, flying insects, and other animals that you know of were once created as a global alarm system, one that was never truly turned off." Sadiq and I gazed at him in disbelief. "Listen, how about you help us get out of this cave, and we'll take you back to our boat, then we can relax and take you to the mainland. Okay? How does that sound?" I said, trying to change the subject. The man ignored my request and smiled. The savant turned and began to guide us down a long, dark cavern. Sadiq quietly loaded a bullet into the chamber of his gun as the man led us. We ended up in an incredible, giant chamber. The ceiling of the cave was 50 feet high, and there was a cliffside in front of us that allowed us to see out into the ocean. The savant stood at the edge of the cliffside, where there was a peculiar-looking, long quartz structure. The walls around him were adorned with strange markings, but not the kind of markings you would see in a normal historic site. They almost seemed as if the symbols had grown organically out from the walls. "I discovered it on a scientific mission several years back, and I haven't been able to leave ever since. The power it has is just intoxicating," the savant said as he placed his hand on the quartz. Then he began to rub his hands across it, lighting it up as his hands moved across. The ocean ahead of him began to shift in strange ways, and the winds began to pick up. Then a flock of birds, flying in unison, began to move with his hand movements. "This is incredible," I said, truly in awe. "That was what they said too." "What, who said?" I asked suspiciously. "Well, my team, of course, before I killed them." "Get your hands off the rock." Sadiq pulled the gun out and aimed it at the man's head. "You know why I've lasted this long? Because I'm the only one who's truly supposed to be here. All others will be removed." As the man said this, hundreds of birds turned towards the cave and flew at full speed, slamming into Sadiq at incredible speed. In the scramble, the gun flew off the side of the cliff, and Sadiq didn't last much longer. "Stop this!" I yelled. "Your desires are inconsequential to me. I control the greater picture now." Squeals from bats began to echo from down in the cavern. For millennia, the creators waited for the chosen one to shape this world in their image, and I have become that one. Out of other options, I ran back into the cave we came from. I made turn after turn down different caverns until I'd completely forgotten where I was. When I looked back, I saw swarms of them flying toward me. Luckily, I saw a small opening up ahead and crawled through it. I realized I was outside. I ran down the mountain towards where the small boat was. Pulling out my walkie-talkie, I tried radioing the crew. "Hey, I'm coming back! Have the boat ready to go now!" I got no response on the other end. Then when I looked into the water, there were hundreds of fish surrounding my boat on all sides. They were just floating there, staring at me, waiting for me to make a move. I then took off toward the yacht, full speed, still radioing them to no avail. When I got into viewing distance, I saw someone fall from the side of the boat. As I grew closer, I realized it was Victoria. A swarm of birds were still flying around the top side of the boat, attacking the rest of the crew. Then the ocean water began to raise up from all sides beside the boat, like a little mountain coming out from the water. The enormous tail of a whale bursted out from the ocean and crashed down on the yacht. It snapped in half, and a giant wave covered the boat entirely. When I got back to it, it was all just a pile of floating rubble. None of the crew had seemed to survive. As I speak to you now, I've been out at sea for a couple days. Not for 1 minute, though, have any of the creatures left my sight. I don't know why the savant has let me live this long. He could have clearly killed me. Maybe he just wants me to upload my story. I think he wants people to know. He wants them to know that when a bird flies into the window or a spider crawls into their bed, it's not just that they're being animals. It's all part of his plan.